So previously, I have always been a fan of like, okay, if you're doing cardio, let's have it on a system of like, you're going to do it at this frequency, X number of days per week, X number of days in a separate session, and then X number of days post lifting. This in itself, it can work. And I think it can be necessary at times. However, what I found is I got busier as I took on more responsibilities in business. When I started nursing school, I found that there were more days that initial plan, it wasn't tracking. Like I wasn't able to consistently execute. And it's something I see with clients pretty often is like, maybe they're able to sustain it for a couple weeks. But then whenever I see that someone is like really struggling, they're like, okay, we've cardio 5-6 days a week. And they're like 3 of these days, those sessions ultimately had to be moved around and not in the way that we wanted them to. Like turning into, oh, well, I didn't hit cardio or I didn't hit my lift before work or before, a long day. Therefore, I had to package in a 1.5 hour lift and then follow that up with 60 minutes of cardio because it's at the end of the week and I'm running out of time and I'm actually making up a little bit of time for this session earlier in the week because I was only able to do 45 minutes and not the additional 15 minutes. And it's things like that ultimately you do that enough. And now this cardio regimen is becoming a pain point. It's becoming an area within your programming that you're not able to adhere to. Now, at some point, I don't really remember when this was, like in my prep in 21, when I turned pro, it was definitely cardio X number of times a week at this duration, which I think is pretty like industry standard. When I prepped myself in 2022, I switched over to just having a weekly amount of cardio to do. And instead of being like, okay, it's going to happen at this frequency, ultimately I did work it back and I'm like, okay, my rest days, I want some cardio to be done. My lower days, I don't want a ton of cardio to be done. My upper days, I can justifiably do a little bit more cardio as opposed to lower days. Cool. So then segmenting based on my schedule. Okay, what are the days that I can do 2-a-days? What are the days I can create a big enough gap in between just a cardio workout, like going to the gym to do cardio and doing my actual lift? Because there needs to be a good amount of time. Like I'm not a fan of like fasted cardio at like 5 a.m. and then my lift at noon. Sometimes it had to happen that way. And some clients, like that's what their schedule is. We have to accommodate, or I choose to accommodate that. But it would be more ideal if there's more time in between those 2 sessions if you are doing 2-a-days. The least favorable structure would be doing this lower body lift that takes a considerable amount of time and then following it up with a long duration of low intensity steady state cardio. High intensity would be even less favorable, but you get what I'm saying. Giving clients the ability to work it into their schedule, giving myself the ability to work it into my schedule as able to, not as needed, but like truly like what makes the most sense in terms of getting enough sleep. Because that's another thing, like telling someone to like, okay, you need to do 2-a-days, 7 days a week, not 7 days a week, 6 days a week. Telling someone that you need to do 2-a-days, 6 days a week, it's like, okay, well, you are ultimately going to sacrifice sleep on the days that you have to wake up extremely early in order to do that longer session of cardio. At a certain point, if sleep is at all compromised, which we can assume that in a fat loss phase and a contest prep, it will likely be compromised. Well, then we have to ask, okay, like what are we sacrificing in order to have this very fixed cardio schedule? And if we're sacrificing something that ultimately is going to affect adherence and training performance, what is the opportunity cost of not having that client wake up every single day just the beginning of the day, first day, doing it fasted? Would it make sense to do a little bit of cardio pre-workout, a little bit post-workout? Because if we're talking about low intensity steady state, if we're talking about like 5% incline, 3 miles an hour on the treadmill, okay, that's something I'm very comfortable with a client, like going into their workout and doing a few minutes, like doing 5 to 10 minutes pre, 5 to 10 minutes post. Okay, you train for 4 or 5 days a week. That in itself, that kind of approach where you're just like systematically chipping away, ultimately is going to make it to where hopefully, at least one of those fasted sessions where you like likely would be sacrificing sleep, hopefully that would be enough to at least give you some kind of return, give you a little bit more recovery from like a weekly standpoint relative to sleep. It's super cliche to be like, no, this approach is highly individualized, but at least for me, at least for my clients, I mean, like I've been coaching people this way for about 2 years where I'm just like, hey, here is your weekly target cardio. This is what you need to do. It is structured. This is not interchangeable with step count. It's not something you can be like, well, I'll get 20,000 steps in today and not do the structured cardio. Like the exchange rate, it's not equitable. But giving them that autonomy to fit it into their schedule, assuming it is lists and assuming that they understand like heart rate targets and those kind of things, ultimately, I think is a superior way in the essence of they're going to then be able to put it into their schedule at their convenience. And if we're just simply looking at cardio as a means to burn calories, which that's what it is, like, I mean, we're not building muscle. Like, just, I had a question about that yesterday. It's like, nope, not building muscle doing that. I think in the long run, that ultimately is going to allow for more of that discipline, that willpower to be preserved. And at the very least, there's an argument to be made that the sleep that we're going to get in turn by, assuming that the client is able to then structure it that way, if their schedule allows for it, there's going to be a bigger return on having consistent sleep. Sleep is going to be one of our greatest tools in order of in terms of managing fatigue. And if we're sacrificing fatigue management in order to burn more calories, specifically through structured cardio, we really have to consider, okay, have we exhausted all of these other tools that ultimately aren't going to inherently drive up fatigue just by the act of doing said thing? Sleeping more will lower fatigue. That will give you that restoration. Having food at a certain threshold, yes, that can drive up fatigue, but personally, I would much rather control the variable that is not going to incrementally drive up more and more fatigue, assuming that we can keep it above that client's baseline, whatever that baseline is for them. You guys know how I feel about it. Make it make sense. Sometimes it's not going to be pretty. Sometimes you are going to have to sacrifice sleep. Sometimes in order to create the deficit, you might have to push past what is comfortable. But I really think when we're talking about creating that deficit, if we aren't considering the impact that cardio is going to have from a fatigue management standpoint, we're severely overlooking that tool being fatigue management and its impact on our ability to bring our best physique to stage or to bring our best physique to whatever point it is at the end of a fat loss phase.